Hey, hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Tatum Johnson, and I will be presenting on teaching pre-literate and non-literate ESL students in the classroom. So without further ado, let's get into the presentation. So today I'm doing a presentation, once again, on teaching pre-literate and non-literate adults in the ESL classroom. I'm going to take a quick look into methods, activities, tips, and resources available for low literacy adults in an ESL setting. A little bit about me. I moved to Texas about 10 years ago, and I graduated from UT Arlington in 2008 with my BA in Spanish. I work for Literacy Connexus as an ESL associate, and I manage our blog. And I am also a teacher and teacher facilitator with Fort Worth ISD's adult education program. Literacy Connexus is a nonprofit organization that helps churches help people with literacy needs. So we help churches establish ESL ministries. We provide teacher training for their ESL volunteer teachers and resources for them as well. We also have two other programs, Ready for School and What's for Lunch, and those address literacy needs for school-age children and the children of refugees, preparing them to go to school in the United States. Um, One other big reason that I am here today is because of the Dollar General Literacy Foundation. The Dollar General Literacy Foundation has a grant, the Literacy Grant, which we received recently, last year, to research resources and identify best practices to help ESL students who lack literacy in their first language. Our plan was to find out what's out there, get feedback from the teachers that are in the field, and begin putting it all together so that we can create resources for the teachers who serve these students and the students themselves. Initially, we planned on actually getting together with the ESL literacy students and the teachers, but COVID had another plan, so we are doing what we can. Here's a little presentation overview. We are right here in the overview section, and I'm going to go over just some things, some general information about ESL literacy students, and then a few studies. I'm going to try to go over those really quickly, but my slides will be available after the presentation if you guys are interested in taking a deeper look, because I found them really interesting. I also want to go over methods, tips, activities, and resources for ESL literacy students, for teaching these pre-literate and non-literate students, and address pre-literate students in a multi-level classroom. So once again, the main goal of this study was to learn how to better serve the pre-literate and non-literate adult English language learners in our programs and in our communities. And we hope to do this by learning more about the methods that do and do not work with pre-literate ELLs in the classroom, and providing resources, tips, and activities for the teachers and volunteers who serve them. So at the beginning, when I started this project, one thing I had to take a look at before I could get anywhere was, what does it mean to be pre-literate or non-literate? What is that in a student? I found that I had a really skewed idea of what a pre-literate or non-literate adult ESL student was. I kind of lumped them all together as just could not read in English. But there are levels to that, and I learned that really quickly. I'm going to address 4 levels of literacy in ESL that these methods and resources will cover. And that is pre-literate, non-literate, semi-literate, and non-Roman alphabet literate. So our pre-literate students are students who come from a culture whose language is oral, so their language is rarely written, if at all. Non-literate students are students whose native language is written, but they have very little exposure to it, so they usually have no formal schooling. Semi-literate students are students who have some literacy in their native language, but it's minimal. So these are students who had to leave schooling for whatever reason. They're usually interrupted learners. And our non-Roman alphabet literate students are students who are literate in their first language, but their language has a non-Roman alphabet. So think Mandarin, Russian, Vietnamese. These students actually although they are literate in their first language, they tend to have some of the same struggles that our pre-literate, non-literate, and semi-literate students have. So I kind of group them into a category with of students whose these resources could help. The next thing I took a look at was the needs and the concerns regarding pre-literate and non-literate students. Pre-literate students need to develop an oral understanding of the words before they can interpret the written ones. That oral foundation is going to be key to them retaining English in general and as a foundation for putting on the written words. They also need to develop visual literacy, and this is especially true if their language was not written or if they have no exposure to it. And they need to learn how to be a student. If your student had no formal schooling or if their schooling was interrupted at an early age, they didn't have time to develop the skills that students need. And so they need to learn how to be a student. And most importantly of all, they need the time to be able to do all of these, to develop these skills. Two major concerns I found that pertain to this group of students is number one, the time paradox. Pre-literate or non-literate students typically need more time when they're learning because they have to develop so many skills at the same time. They're developing skills starting at the beginning of literacy, like the very beginning. But a lot of these students don't have that kind of time to spare. If you're dealing with people who are here on asylum or refugees, some of these students might be racing the clock to learn enough English to be able to provide and sustain for themselves before their assistance runs out. And the second one is making sure that their learning needs are being met, especially in a multi-level classroom. So multi-level classrooms can be hard to manage, but when you have a pre-literate or non-literate student, it's very, very easy for them to fall behind or get lost. Okay. Here I have some learning differences. I won't go over all of them for the sake of time, but I will point out a few. Pre-literate or non-literate learners tend to learn by doing, whereas literate learners can learn a little bit better from print. So this means that pre-literate or non-literate learners really need hands-on. They need that hands-on activities. They also tend to repeat things in order to remember them. So repetitive activities, oral drills are going to be really useful with this set of students. Pre-literate or non-literate learners have little or no learning time, and so they lack confidence in their learning ability. Whereas literate learners have already spent time learning to read and they know that they are able to learn. So when working with pre-literate or non-literate learners, one of the things that ESL teachers have to do or keep in mind is building those students' confidence. They need to build their confidence in their ability to learn, and that's going to increase their internal motivation. Both sets of students learn best when content applies to them, but whereas literate learners may be able to distinguish between important and non-important information, pre-literate or non-literate learners might see all content as equal. So this might be something, if you're working on a worksheet, you might have to be explicit as to where you want the students to concentrate. What information on that page is important or on your screen if you're teaching virtually. During my research, I read a lot of studies, I read a lot of research, but today I'm only going to talk about two. And the first one is what works for adult ESL literacy students. And this study was done by Larry Condoley, Heidi Wrigley, and Quang Yoon at the American Institutes for Research. And the study actually took place, it's an older study, it took place from 1999 to 2001. And they collected data from 13 programs in 7 states, Texas being one of them. The purpose of the study was just to identify ways that ESL programs could provide effective instruction to improve the English language and literacy skills of ESL literacy students. So they took a look at the different variables for instructional emphasis and instructional strategies. And they measured their outcomes against the best ALAS CASAS and the WJBRSC and WJRCC, which are reading comprehension tests. What they found was that making real world connections, using native language in classrooms, varied practice and interaction, and oral communication emphasis provided the greatest growth in basic reading skills, basic reading comprehension, and oral development. Unfortunately, the study also found very little improvement in students' writing skills over the study period, which, in my opinion, can really be attributed to the fact that when we teach really low level students, oftentimes we're teaching them survival English, and that centers around oral communication. But when we're teaching ESL literacy students who are not literate in their first language, we just have to remember to incorporate those writing skills because those need to be developed in these students. Okay. The second study I wanted to talk about was what doesn't work for the lowest literacy learners and why. And this one was done by Jean Maripodi, but with Apple Star Productions, which is a journal of applied language studies. And John Maripodi conducted a task analysis for activities used in the three most common methods for teaching reading instruction. John Maripodi wanted to look at the learning gaps in these tasks and identify why they were problematic for pre-literate learners and what are some things that we can do to solve and close the gaps. So he took a look at the phonics method, the sight work method, and the whole language method. And what John Maripodi found was that students, in order to be successful, needed a combination of methods. No one of these methods would work on its own. And that students needed a foundation in sound differentiation, phonemic awareness, visual and print literacy, a strong oral foundation, and they also needed a foundation in sound isolation and identification in order to be successful at most of these tasks. And this print literacy is going to be super important. If print was not a part of the students' everyday lives before, they need to learn how to connect printed text with linguistic meaning and the spoken word. And then they need to know that in English, we have to read from left to right and from top to bottom. John Maripodi suggested determining whether or not your activity was appropriate for your students by conducting a task analysis. And that just means examining the discrete skills involved in the activity. For example, with a matching worksheet, some of the discrete skills that are involved in that activity include, does your student know how to orient their paper? Can they identify the clip art and then connect it with a word or the item itself and then remember that in English? Can they draw a line from from the picture to the word? Can they recognize the word? And things like that. And these are important to do when we're designing lesson plans and activities for our students. Do they have this foundation? Do they have the foundation needed to be able to do the activity? And if not, that's something that we have to practice in class. I spoke to a few teachers and in the field during my research in this program for this project, sorry. And I just have some words and tips from a few teachers that I spoke to, a few people that I spoke to. The first one was Lulu Shira with Catholic Charities. And Lulu Shira's advice was to remember to take your time. Literacy takes time. I know sometimes it feels like we're, trying to get the students to know as much as possible, but there are a lot of skills to develop. So even if it seems like you're staying on the same subject, they need that time. And print may not have been a part of their daily life before. So that's another reason why they need time. They need time to get adjusted. She suggested showing everything multiple times through a variety of methods and to start with topics that are familiar to your students. So if you have students who come from a landlocked country and you want to teach animals, maybe don't start with ocean animals. They may not be familiar with them. I also talked to Cynthia Kilpatrick, Dr. Cynthia Kilpatrick with UT Arlington, and she is also a teacher trainer with Literacy Connections. And she suggested that the first thing that an ESL instructor should do when working with a pre-literate or non-literate student is to find out if that student has any type of literacy at all. So this would include things like letter recognition in their L1, which might be difficult if they have a non-Roman script, but we do what we can. But also things like identifying sounds and syllables and rhyming. She also included some of her favorite resources for this group, and hopefully I will get to show them to you. I also spoke with Elizabeth Martinez, and Elizabeth Martinez developed a program specifically for low level ESL literacy students. And in this program, she begins with phonics first because she believes that phonics are the Velcro for everything else in ESL to stick to. She said that by creating a strong foundation in phonics, then students are then able to build on that with things like sight words and whole language, and it becomes a lot easier for them to pick up English. Um, so moving on to methods and approaches. There are two main methods of teaching ESL literacy, and those are parts to a whole and whole language or meaning based. Okay, so parts to whole are things like sounds, letters, and blending, and meaning based are whole words, sight words, whole language, and language experience activities. When dealing with parts to a whole, in this approach, students learn the letters of the alphabet first, usually, and then connect those with their corresponding sounds, learn how to blend those sounds, and then the instructor then embeds those letters and sounds into meaningful context for the students. Two programs that are designed for this particular method are the Loudbox Way to Reading in English from New Readers Press and ESL Imprinted by Elizabeth Martinez. With Loudbox Way to English, it focuses on learning through association using pictures. And he actually developed this program specifically for ESL students with limited to no English exposure. With Way to Reading, it's designed to teach adult students to read, so it's a really good step up from that. New Readers Press also offers Loudbox Focus on Phonics, which has explicit phonic exercises if you just want to incorporate a little phonics into your daily lessons. With ESL Imprinted, Elizabeth Martinez has two programs. One is Phonics for Reading and Understanding, and the other one is Run to the Bus. Phonics for Reading and Understanding is also intended for very low-level pre-literate students to give them a foundation in phonics. And Run to the Bus is designed to help low-level students learn how to read, but it addresses the challenge. And if you teach adult ESL, you know that sometimes it can be challenging of finding material that is appropriate for adults. So her lessons use stories that students can relate to, like maybe not missing the bus or tribulations of learning English. Some resources, some of my favorite resources anyway, that are great for parts to a whole include the Beginning Alphabetics Test and Tools, or the BAT, which aligns with the English Code Crackers, okay? ABC Fast Phonics, Starfall, MSED Services, and Literacy Minnesota's organization. And I am actually going to show you a couple of those. So first up, we have BAT, and this is the Beginning Alphabetics Test and Tools. Okay, and this is a really, really great resource, especially if you're just beginning. So this has testing notes, it has test directions and actual tests for learning what your students know. And then it also has wonderful teaching notes, instructional orders, instructional approaches and practices, and it also includes lesson plans that kind of go based on the level that your students are at. It also includes a lot of resources and things that are already ready-made for you. So this is a really, really great resource, and English Code Crackers has additional activities that align with this. The next resource that I would like to show you is the Phonics Kit from Minnesota Literacy Organization. And this kit is also a wonderful resource. It tells you everything that it should contain, how to put it together. It gives you use suggestions and a log if you need it. It gives you lesson plans and tons of activities that you can use when you are trying to emphasize and teach phonics to a pre-literate or non-literate ESL student. This also goes hand in hand with a literacy, a phonics and phonemic awareness literacy workstation from the same organization. And this is great. It has ready-made for you. It has instructions, student directions that are great for just giving straight to your students. And then if you keep scrolling, it has a teacher handbook. So it tells you what to do with these, what kind of activities they work with, how to put them together, around how long it should take. And it gives you ways to put all of this together. It's a really great resource. Okay, going back to our slides. Okay, meaning-based. Most programs are meaning-based. So think Ventures, Burlington. And in these ones, students learn words without breaking them into smaller pieces. So they learn the whole words and then they kind of apply that in meaningful, appropriate ways to their lives. Some of my favorite resources for this include Making It Real from the Tacoma Community House. Oops, where did it go? The Tutor Curriculum Guide for Preliterate ESL students, and a handbook for tutors working with adult ESL students by Margie Felix Lund. And these are great guidebooks. So they give you everything from advice, tips, activity ideas to lesson plans, and good ways to make your curriculum flow when you're working with these students. The Literacy Minnesota organization, once again, a great resource. They also have a pre-beginning curriculum. So if you were starting from complete scratch, this is wonderful. It is already put together for you. But it's also really flexible. So you can add to it as you see fit. They have literacy workstations, which I showed you one of them. And they also have a beginner story bank. Caringbush and Bow Valley College also have adult readers, which are appropriate for adult literacy, ESL literacy students. So they are very short books. They come with pictures. They're appropriate and relevant to students' lives, and they're really great resources. Lesla Literacy Minnesota, Marshall Adult Education Services, Multilingual Minnesota, and Co-ABE also have other resources where you can find online training or just general activities and things like that to use in your classroom and with your students. And I will show you a few of those as well. Okay, this is Making It Real. So it is a PDF. This is 116 pages of a fantastic resource. Making It Real is designed for teaching pre-literate adult refugee students. And a lot of these activities are designed for in-person classes, but I found that most of them can be adapted to teaching virtually. As you can see, they have a ton of things. They have controlled practice, bridge activities, tools and techniques for conversation, listening activities, how to put it all together. They also have literacy basics, and they separate things into meaning-based approaches, managing multi-level classes. This is a wonderful, wonderful resource. If you look here, this is from the Minnesota Literacy Council, and it gives you activities for tutoring ESL students. Although it is for tutoring, it says for tutoring, I use these all the time. I think they are wonderful activities. This is an example of the Caringbush reading series. So this is one of their books. And it's called My English Class. As you can see, it's 17 pages, but it's got really short, simple sentences that are designed for ESL students learning how to read, and they all come with real photographs, which is wonderful. This is the ESL Story Bank, and if you look down, it's got different categories, and then you can click on a story, and it also has related worksheets and target sounds and word families all laid out for you, so it's really great. This is an example of one of those lessons from the pre-beginning curriculum called On the Job. So this is something that students can use right away, which really builds confidence, and it's very motivating. Especially when you're working with pre-literate or non-literate students who may be trying to learn enough English to get a new job or whatever the case may be. And it just goes into depth on what you should do and how you should do things. And the lesson is laid out for you completely. So these are all really wonderful resources. Okay. Okay. The most important thing when you are thinking about Meaning-based and parts to whole is to find balance. Ideally, the balance should be a little bit different for every student because their needs are different, but you're gonna have to find a balance that works for both you and your students. Moving on into the tips and activities for teaching pre-literate and non-literate ESL students. Here's just a sampling of tips and advice and activities that I found that I thought were really great for pre-literate and non-literate adult ESL students. For the sake of time, I won't read them all, but once again, the slides will be available. Use oral drills to help build student confidence. I think this is a great, great tip because it's low stress for students. You can use sentence starters and they just kind of have to fill in the word. It's repetitive enough that the students can catch on quickly, even if not at first, and it helps them build that confidence. And then you can use that confidence to create openings for students to have natural conversations, which is also important because this is the language that they're going to use out in the world. You want to vary your question types and remember that everything is new. Whereas, concepts like they might know what a pen is, relating that pen to the written word pen and learning that print and visual literacy, that's going to be new and it's going to take time. And also, you can use your classroom to build literacy. So you can do it with class management. So having your students sign in and out, having them volunteer to write the date on the board. You can communicate with your students in writing or label things in the classroom. Okay. Okay. A few tips for choosing activities. You want to connect your activities to your students' lives, of course, because students learn best when the material is relevant to them. And you can do this by using your students' interest and giving students choices. You also want to teach your students self-monitoring skills. This is going to be especially important if you are teaching in a pre-literate or non-literate ESL student in a multi-level classroom, because at some point, inevitably, you are going to have to attend to two groups of students separately. So maybe your literate students and your pre-literate students so that you can meet both of their learning needs. And while you're attending to your other students, you need your pre-literate student to be able to monitor themselves through an activity once they have instructions, and also monitor their progress. Are they trying? Is it working? Do they need help? So for parts to whole learning activity ideas, I have a bunch here. For the sake of time, once again, I won't read them all. But some of my favorites include letter or phonics bingo. A lot of times we think of bingo with like whole words, but you can also do it with like letters or phonics tiles. And you can say words and have students pick out sounds that relate to that or that are in that word, or the beginning letter of the word. Once you've already gone over those words in class. You can also do things like show me, and this is really good for when you first get to know those students or if you have shy students, because they can just point to it or identify. They can point to, pick up, identify a picture or a word that begins with a chosen letter or sound, and it's really low stress for them because sometimes producing gives students a little bit of stress and anxiety. You can also do minimal pair activities. These are one of my favorites. So they try to identify the word that they hear, and this helps students develop the being able to hear the difference between similar sounds in English. Some other examples, these are great for in-person classes, but 4 squares, and so in this one you would have a piece of paper with 4 squares and a letter or a beginning letter or beginning sound. You could even do the end, and you would have like word cards, and these can be done on flashcards or pre-made ones, whatever you have from the lesson, and they just kind of drag or place the word on the square that has the correlating beginning sound or beginning letter. You can also do things like this with word families, and these I like to do with flashcards, where we place a beginning letter here and an end sound that we're working on. And then we change this so instead of at, hat, we can change it to a C and we'll have k, at, cat. For meaning-based activities, there are also a ton of activity ideas that you can do. Some of my favorite ones are the teacher is wrong. My students, for some reason, love when Miss Johnson is wrong. So using familiar language, you can say a sentence, and make a mistake in there. When you're starting out, just make one mistake and have students identify where was the mistake. Can they correct it? I also really like to do tell me about this picture. This is one we do all the time in my classroom. And it's you show students a familiar picture and have them identify vocabulary words. So even if they only know a few things, so you can show them a picture of a kitchen or maybe a grocery store, a gas station, a school, a classroom, and have them identify things that they recognize in English. And then you can use those words to make simple sentences or turn it into a lesson. This can go a lot of places. Okay. Two other examples are I have a grid example here. This is an example, grids are great first, but this is an example of something I would do with a lesson on likes and dislikes because it doesn't have a ton of words, which can be a little intimidating when you're learning how to read and write. Ideally, you would use better pictures than this. You would use real photographs, but I'm in PowerPoint and this is what I had. um, but we can do things like, does Maria like coffee? And then we'd come to the grid and look. Yes, she does. Okay. Does Maria like ice cream? Okay. No, she doesn't. And then you can transcribe those sentences onto the board as the students are making them. TPR is also really, really great for students who are kinesthetic learners. They need to do something to be able to retain information. And you can do TPR with a series of actions. So pick up the pen, put down the notebook, give me the eraser. Okay. You can also do TPR on paper, which works better virtually. I tend to have my students do it on index cards. So I'll say something like, write your name small, write your name big, okay? And then point to the big name or show me the card with the big name. Show me the card with the small name, okay? Which one is bigger? Which one is smaller? This is great for teaching things like adjectives, but it gives students something to do and it makes them interactive, especially if you're working virtually. Um, Moving on to pre-literacy in the multi-level classroom. When managing a multi-level classroom, there is no middle ground in the classroom. The key is to provide instruction and materials that match every level that's represented. And that sounds a lot scarier than it is. When you have a multi-level classroom, you do kind of have to teach to the middle when you're working with the whole class, but you also have to make sure that in your instruction, you have an objective for each level in the class, and your material will allow them to answer and respond at their own level. It'll challenge each student at their own level. And you can do this by using grouping strategies, assigning students appropriate tasks within the same activity. So it kind of feels like they're doing it as a whole, but they have appropriate level appropriate tasks to complete. Some grouping and strategies include whole groups, so the whole class, small groups, cross ability groups or pairs, same ability groups or pairs, or individualized work. Okay. Some activity ideas that I think are great for pre-literate in a multi-level classroom include dialogue journals. This is really great for building a relationship with your students because even if they can't write a whole lot in the beginning, you can still kind of talk to them and you can actually talk to them and transcribe what they want to tell you in the beginning until they learn enough to be able to write to you themselves. Pictures, so captioning, labeling pictures, doing grids, TPR and paper, dialogues and stories, and self-access materials. So some manipulatives that I think are great for pre-literate or non-literate students. This one is a great one that I like to use. It is very cheap. And it's a kinesthetic activity. This I think is great because it helps improve print and letter recognition. It's low cost and fast prep, and students can practice it independently or they can practice it with a partner. So in this case, you could use magnets, printed letters, or handwritten letters. I like to use handwritten letters because if I'm writing on a board in a classroom, that is the handwriting that they're going to see. And so I like for them to be able to recognize my handwriting so that they can easily read my instructions. And it's something that they see over and over again. These are dry erase dice, and these are from Dollar Tree, and I love them so much. These dice can also be used independently or with partners, one-on-one with a tutor or teacher. They can also be used in like small groups, and they're great for practicing CBC words, blends and digraphs, word families. They can also be used for things like putting simple sentences together. If instead of letters and blends like I have up here, you can do words that you've already worked on in class. An activity that I would do with these is have a small group, have all of the dice, and then have a student roll the dice. And whatever letter landed on, the student would have to make that sound and then say a word with the sound on it. And of course, because these are dry erase, you can use sounds and letters that are appropriate for the vocabulary that you're working on in class during your lessons. Sometimes we don't want to make things, and sometimes we just want to buy them. So three that you can buy directly from Amazon that I like. Number one is the whisper phone. So this is kind of old school, but you whisper into one end and the sound is amplified back at them at the other end. This is great for phonics and pronunciation because they can hear if they're pronouncing the sound correctly. And it's also great for really shy students who don't really like speaking up, because as adults, we tend to get a little nervous that maybe we're going to get it wrong and we might feel embarrassed. These puzzles are also great independent activities. And this particular set that's in the picture is from Amazon. It is pre-made. The word chunks are pre-made and they're color-coded, which is great. But I also have a set that I use that is blank, so I can make whatever words match my lesson. An activity idea that I would do with these is to organize the words, whatever words I would want to use beforehand, and give students half of each puzzle. And then have my students walk around the room and try to make a match to a word. And then we could use those words to create sentences and stories and practice our vocabulary for the lesson. So this could really be done for a lot of things. The last one is digraph sliders, and these are great when you're working on phonics. So students just slide the first one to create a word and then match it with an icon. So it's a really great independent activity, and it's low stress for students. My presentation is really an accumulation of information and resources that I acquired during my research. If you would like a copy of the science and resources that I used and referenced in this presentation, please email me and I'm super happy to share. If you are interested in providing feedback or sharing your experiences with pre-literate or non-literate adult ESL students, please contact me. I would love to hear from you. I am currently creating resources, compiling resources. I'm working on putting content onto a blog that will be available for ESL teachers who serve ESL students. And I want to include things for ESL teachers who serve this pre-literate or non-literate adult ESL students. So I would love to hear from you if you would share your experience with me. Thank you guys so much for attending my session today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was useful for you. If you have any questions or answers or feedback, please feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information. Once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today on this lovely Saturday.